The rain hammered against our kitchen window like an impatient debt collector. I sat at the breakfast table, laptop open, pretending to review system logs while actually watching my wife Sienna pack her overnight bag for another business conference. Her movements were too practiced, too efficient, like she'd done this 100 times before. "Portland again?" I asked, not looking up from my screen. "Seattle," she corrected without missing a beat. "The FinTech Summit I told you last week." I hadn't heard about any FinTech Summit last week, or any week for that matter, but I nodded anyway, playing the role of the oblivious husband. Elliot Mercer, senior IT analyst at Pacific Logistics, too buried in code to notice his wife's lies. Sienna zipped her bag with unnecessary force. She was beautiful in that sharp, corporate way, all clean lines and calculated angles. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, not a strand out of place even at 6 in the morning. Everything about her screamed success, control, ambition, everything except the guilt she thought she was hiding. "I'll be back Sunday night," she said, checking her phone for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. "Drive safe," I replied automatically. She paused at the kitchen doorway, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood. For a moment, I thought she might say something real, something honest. Instead, she adjusted her purse strap and walked out without another word. I waited until her BMW pulled out of the driveway before closing my laptop. Through the window, I watched our neighbor Mr. Greaves wave from his garden. The old man was always watching, always gardening, always ready with a friendly observation about the neighborhood. He'd probably noticed more about my marriage than I had. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Fiona. "Coffee later? You sound like you need it." I hadn't talked to Fiona since Tuesday, but she had this uncanny ability to sense when my life was falling apart. Probably came from growing up in the same house where emotional disasters were as common as rain in the Pacific Northwest. I texted back, "Rain check, working on something." The something was my growing suspicion that my wife of 4 years was having an affair. Not exactly the kind of project you tackle over coffee and pastries. I'd been noticing things. Small things that individually meant nothing but together painted a picture I didn't want to see. The way she guarded her phone, the new perfume she wore on conference days, the fact that her book club always met on nights when I worked late at the office. Sienna thought I was oblivious because I spent my days troubleshooting network issues and optimizing server performance. She saw me as the classic tech guy, smart enough to fix her laptop when it froze, too socially awkward to notice when she was lying to my face. She was wrong about the second part. I went down to my workshop in the basement, a cluttered space filled with computer parts, electronics projects, and the remnants of hobbies I'd started but never finished. It was my sanctuary, the one place in the house that was entirely mine. Sienna never came down here, claimed the concrete floors and fluorescent lighting gave her headaches. I pulled up the phone bill on my laptop and started scrolling through the call logs. Sienna's number appeared dozens of times, but most of the calls were to numbers I recognized. Her office, her mother, her friend Nina. Nothing suspicious there. But then I noticed something interesting. On the days when she claimed to be traveling for work, her phone showed tower pings from locations that didn't match her supposed destinations. Last month's Portland conference had her phone connecting to towers in downtown Seattle. This month's client meeting in Spokane put her in Bellevue. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. Either my wife was the world's most geographically confused businesswoman, or she was lying about where she was going. And if she was lying about her location, what else was she lying about? My phone rang, startling me out of my detective work. Fiona's name appeared on the screen. "You ignored my text," she said without preamble. "That means either you're working on something stupid or something important. Which is it?" "Maybe both," I admitted. "Sienna again?" Fiona had never liked my wife. She'd been polite at the wedding, supportive during the early years, but I could always sense her disapproval simmering beneath the surface. She thought Sienna was cold, calculating, more interested in what I could provide than who I actually was. "I think she's cheating on me," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Fiona was quiet for a moment. "What makes you think that?" I told her about the phone records, the mysterious conferences, the way Sienna had been acting lately. As I spoke, I realized how obvious it all seemed when laid out in sequence. How had I missed it for so long? "What are you going to do?" Fiona asked. "I don't know yet." "Well, when you figure it out, call me. And Elliot?" "Yeah?" "Don't do anything stupid." After hanging up, I sat in the basement for another hour, staring at spreadsheets and call logs. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. My wife was lying to me, probably cheating on me, and treating me like I was too stupid to notice. The smart thing would be to confront her directly, ask for the truth, suggest counseling, try to save our marriage like a mature adult. But I wasn't feeling particularly mature. I was feeling like a man who'd been played for a fool by someone who was supposed to love him, someone who shared his bed, his bank account, his life, while conducting her own secret existence behind his back. By the time I went back upstairs, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Sienna. Not yet. First, I was going to find out exactly what she was hiding, and then I was going to decide what to do about it. The house felt different without her in it. Quieter, but also somehow more honest. Like the walls could finally stop pretending everything was fine. I made myself a sandwich and sat at the kitchen table, looking out at the gray Seattle sky. Mr. Greaves was still in his garden, now wearing a rain slicker as he tended to his roses. The old man caught me watching and waved again. I waved back, wondering if he'd noticed Sienna's increasingly frequent absences. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hey stranger, long time no see, coffee sometime?" I stared at the message, trying to place the number. It wasn't in my contacts, and I couldn't think of anyone who might be reaching out after a long absence. I was about to delete it when another message arrived. "This is Derek, by the way. Derek Vaughn, from Sienna's office." Derek Vaughn. I'd met him exactly once at Sienna's company Christmas party 6 months ago, tall, athletic, the kind of guy who wore expensive suits and drove a Tesla. He was the legal counsel for Sienna's fintech startup, and I remembered thinking he seemed like the type who'd been popular in high school and never gotten over it. Why was Derek Vaughn texting me? I typed back, "Hey Derek, sure, coffee sounds good." His response came immediately. "Great, how about tomorrow morning? There's something I wanted to discuss with you." Something he wanted to discuss. That was interesting. And probably not good. I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown, then spent the rest of the evening trying to figure out what Derek Vaughn could possibly want to talk to me about. The obvious answer was the one I didn't want to consider, that he knew something about Sienna's mysterious conferences, or worse, that he was part of them. I went to bed early, lying alone in the king-size bed that suddenly felt enormous. Sienna's side was cold and undisturbed, her pillow still holding the faint scent of her expensive perfume. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the rain, and tried not to think about where she was or who she was with. But my mind kept circling back to Derek Vaughn and his mysterious coffee invitation. Whatever he wanted to discuss, I had a feeling it was going to change everything. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, typical for October in Seattle. I drove downtown through the familiar maze of construction zones and bike lanes, my windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the persistent mist. The coffee shop Derek had chosen was one of those aggressively hip places with exposed brick walls and baristas who looked like they belonged in an indie rock band. I arrived 10 minutes early and claimed a table in the corner, positioning myself where I could see the entrance. Derek walked in exactly on time, scanning the room until he spotted me. He looked every bit as polished as I remembered. Perfect hair, expensive jacket, the kind of confident stride that came from never having to worry about money or status. "Elliot," he said, extending his hand as he approached my table. "Thanks for meeting me on short notice." "No problem," I replied, shaking his hand and noting his firm grip. "What can I do for you?" Derek ordered some complicated drink with multiple adjectives, while I stuck with black coffee. We made small talk about the weather and traffic until his elaborate beverage arrived, and then he got down to business. "This is a little awkward," he began, stirring his drink with unnecessary concentration. "But I felt like you should know." Here it comes, I thought, the confirmation of what I'd already suspected. "It's about Sienna," Derek continued. "I think she might be having an affair." I blinked, caught off guard by his directness. "You think?" "I know it sounds crazy, but I've noticed some things at the office. She's been taking a lot of personal calls, leaving early for mysterious appointments, and last week I saw her having lunch with this guy I didn't recognize. They looked pretty cozy." Derek was either genuinely concerned or an exceptionally good actor. He seemed nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup and avoiding direct eye contact. Either way, he was confirming my suspicions while positioning himself as the helpful colleague looking out for my interests. "Did you get a good look at this guy?" I asked. "Mid-30s, dark hair, expensive suit, drives a black Mercedes. I got the impression he wasn't from around here, maybe California or somewhere down south." I nodded thoughtfully, filing away the details. "How long has this been going on?" "I first noticed it about 3 months ago, but it could have been longer." "I'm sorry, man. I debated whether to tell you, but I figured you deserved to know." Derek seemed sincere, but something about his story didn't add up. If he'd been observing Sienna for 3 months, why reach out to me now? And why did his description of the mystery man sound so generic? "I appreciate you telling me," I said. "It explains a few things." "Have you noticed anything at home?" "Some changes in her routine, more business trips, longer hours. I thought it was just work stress." Derek nodded sympathetically. "These startup environments can be intense, but this seems like something else." We talked for another 20 minutes, with Derek providing more details about Sienna's suspicious behavior at the office. He painted a picture of a woman leading a double life, sneaking around behind her husband's back while maintaining her professional facade. Everything he said aligned with my own observations, which should have been reassuring. Instead, it made me more suspicious. Derek's story was too convenient, too perfectly tailored to confirm my existing fears. As we prepared to leave, Derek handed me his business card. "If you need anything, or if you want to talk more about this, give me a call. I know how difficult this must be." I pocketed the card and thanked him again for his concern. We shook hands outside the coffee shop, and I watched him walk to his Tesla parked across the street. As he drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just been played. But played how? And why? I spent the drive home analyzing our conversation, looking for clues in Derek's words and behavior. He'd seemed genuinely sympathetic, but there was something rehearsed about his delivery, like he'd practiced what he was going to say. And then there was the timing. Why reach out to me the day after Sienna left for another mysterious conference? Why now, after months of supposedly observing her suspicious behavior? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that Derek Vaughn wasn't just a concerned colleague. He was involved in whatever Sienna was hiding, and his coffee shop performance had been designed to throw me off the scent, which meant I was dealing with something more complicated than a simple affair. When I got home, I went straight to my basement workshop and pulled up everything I could find about Derek Vaughn. His LinkedIn profile showed an impressive resume: Harvard Law, several years at a prestigious Seattle firm, current position as legal counsel at Sienna's company. His social media presence was minimal, but carefully curated, showing him at charity events and professional conferences. On the surface, he looked exactly like what he claimed to be: a successful lawyer with good intentions and bad news about my wife. but I'd learned not to trust surfaces. I was deep in my research when my phone rang. Sienna's name appeared on the screen, and I answered on the third ring. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "Hi, honey. Just checking in. The conference is going well, lots of networking opportunities." "That's great. Where are you staying again?" "The Fairmont Olympic. It's beautiful but ridiculously expensive. Thank goodness the company is paying." I made a mental note to check whether the Fairmont Olympic was actually hosting any fintech conferences this weekend. "When do you think you'll be home?" "Sunday evening, probably around 8. I'll grab dinner on the road, so don't wait for me." "Drive safe," I said. "I will. Love you." "Love you too." After hanging up, I sat in my basement workshop, staring at my computer screen. My wife had just told me she loved me while lying about where she was and what she was doing. Derek Vaughn had warned me about her affair while probably being part of it himself. And I was sitting in my basement, playing amateur detective instead of confronting the situation like an adult. Fiona would definitely classify this as doing something stupid. But I wasn't ready to confront Sienna yet. Not until I had all the facts. Not until I understood exactly what I was dealing with. I picked up Derek's business card and studied it for a long moment. Then I opened a new browser window and started planning my next move. If Derek wanted to play games, I was ready to play along. Sunday evening arrived with the usual Pacific Northwest drizzle, and I positioned myself in the living room where I could see the driveway through our front window. Sienna had texted an hour earlier saying she was 30 minutes out, right on schedule for her promised 8 o'clock arrival. At 8:15, her BMW pulled into the driveway. I watched her gather her overnight bag and conference materials, noting how she checked her phone twice before getting out of the car. Even from a distance, I could see the practiced efficiency of her movements, like an actor who'd performed this scene many times before. "How was the conference?" I asked as she came through the front door. "Exhausting, but productive," she replied, setting down her bag and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. "Lots of new contacts, some interesting partnership opportunities." "Learn anything useful?" "The usual stuff. Blockchain applications, cryptocurrency regulations, digital payment security. Pretty dry material." Sienna launched into a detailed description of various conference sessions, speaking with the kind of specificity that suggested either genuine experience or careful preparation. She mentioned keynote speakers, panel discussions, and networking events with the casual familiarity of someone who'd actually attended them. Either she really had been at a fintech conference, or she'd done her homework. "Sounds like it was worth the trip," I said. "Definitely. I'm beat, though. Mind if I grab a shower and head to bed early?" "Of course. I'll probably stay up and catch up on some work." Sienna headed upstairs while I remained in the living room, listening to the sound of running water from our master bathroom. After a few minutes, I quietly climbed the stairs and retrieved her overnight bag from where she'd left it by our bedroom door. In the bathroom, I could hear Sienna humming softly as she showered, a good sign that she was relaxed and off guard. I unzipped her bag and quickly examined the contents. Conference materials from the Seattle FinTech Summit, complete with agenda, speaker bios, and promotional materials, a hotel key card from the Fairmont Olympic, receipts from restaurants I recognized as being near the hotel, even a conference name tag with her name and company information. Everything looked legitimate. Too legitimate. I photographed the contents with my phone, then carefully returned everything to its original position. By the time Sienna emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in her terry cloth robe, I was back downstairs pretending to review email. "Good night, honey," she called from the top of the stairs. "Sleep well," I replied. I waited until I heard our bedroom door close, then went to my basement workshop and started fact-checking Sienna's conference story. The Seattle FinTech Summit was real, held at the Fairmont Olympic over the weekend, featuring exactly the speakers and sessions she'd described. But here's what was interesting. The conference registration list was publicly available online, and Sienna's name wasn't on it. I cross-referenced the hotel records I could access through my work connections. Pacific Logistics did business with several major hotel chains, and I had legitimate reasons to access their booking systems for corporate travel arrangements. The Fairmont Olympic showed no reservation under Sienna's name for the weekend in question, so she had conference materials from an event she hadn't registered for and a hotel key card from a hotel where she hadn't officially stayed. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to create the illusion that she'd attended a legitimate business conference. I leaned back in my chair, considering the implications. This wasn't a simple affair. This was an elaborate deception involving forged credentials, planted evidence, and careful attention to detail. Someone with resources and connections was helping my wife maintain her cover story. Someone like Derek Vaughn, perhaps. I spent the next hour researching Derek's background more thoroughly, using some of the investigative tools I'd learned during my brief stint in the Army before transitioning to civilian IT work. His Harvard Law credentials checked out, as did his employment history. But I found some interesting gaps in his personal timeline, periods where his social media went quiet and his professional activities were harder to track. More importantly, I found a connection I'd missed before. Derek had previously worked for a law firm that specialized in corporate acquisitions, and one of their major clients had been a fintech company that was later acquired by Sienna's current employer. Derek and Sienna had a professional relationship that predated her current job by at least 2 years, which meant their affair, if that's what this was, had been going on much longer than Derek had implied during our coffee shop conversation. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Not about what you think." I stared at the message, trying to place the number. It wasn't Derek's. I'd memorized his contact information. This was someone else entirely. I typed back, "Who is this?" "Nina, Sienna's friend. Meet me tomorrow at Pike Place Market. Main entrance, noon." Nina Lark. I'd met her several times at Sienna's work events. An attractive brunette who worked in HR and seemed to know everyone's business. She was Sienna's closest friend at the company, the person my wife turned to for advice about everything from office politics to weekend plans. Why did Nina want to meet with me? And what did she mean by, "not about what you think"? I typed back, "Why?" Her response came immediately. "Because I know what's really going on, and you're not going to like it." I stared at the phone for a long moment, then typed, "I'll be there." The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove downtown to Pike Place Market. The tourist crowds were lighter than usual due to the persistent rain, but the market still hummed with its usual chaotic energy. I positioned myself near the main entrance, watching for Nina while trying to look like just another customer browsing the flower stalls. She appeared exactly at noon, wearing a dark coat and sunglasses despite the overcast sky. Nina was the kind of woman who turned heads, tall, elegant, with the kind of confidence that came from knowing she was attractive and smart. She spotted me immediately and walked over with purposeful strides. "Thanks for coming," she said, glancing around nervously. "Let's walk." We strolled through the market, past the fish vendors and produce stands, while Nina gathered her thoughts. She seemed genuinely agitated, checking over her shoulder and avoiding eye contact. "This is difficult," she began. "Sienna is my friend, but what she's doing isn't right." "What exactly is she doing?" Nina stopped walking and turned to face me. "She's having an affair with Derek Vaughn. Has been for almost 2 years, but that's not the worst part." I waited for her to continue. "They're planning to leave Seattle together. Derek got a job offer in San Francisco, and Sienna is going with him. She's been systematically moving money out of your joint accounts, building up a nest egg for their new life together." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd suspected the affair, but the financial betrayal was something I hadn't considered. "How do you know all this?" "Because I've been helping them," Nina said quietly. "Hotel reservations, alibi coordination, even some of the money transfers. Sienna convinced me that you were emotionally abusive, that she was afraid to leave you directly. And you believed that? At first, yes. But the more I got to know you through Sienna's stories, the more they stopped making sense. You're not abusive, you're just oblivious. And Sienna took advantage of that. Nina reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. I made copies of everything: bank records, hotel receipts, text messages between Sienna and Derek. I was supposed to destroy them, but something didn't feel right. I took the envelope with trembling hands. Why are you telling me this now? Because Sienna promised me something in return for my help. She said when you two got divorced, she'd recommend me for a promotion to director level. But last week I found out she's been telling Derek that I was too emotionally involved and couldn't be trusted with sensitive information. Nina's voice carried a bitter edge. She used me to betray you, then betrayed me in the process. I realized that if she could lie to me so easily about her plans, she'd probably lied about you too. We found a quiet corner near the waterfront where I could examine the contents of the envelope without prying eyes. Nina had been thorough. Bank statements showing systematic withdrawals from our joint accounts, hotel receipts spanning 18 months, and screenshots of text conversations between Sienna and Derek that left no doubt about the nature of their relationship. But the most damaging evidence was a document I didn't recognize, a loan application for a home equity line of credit on our house, bearing what appeared to be my signature. I never signed this, I said, studying the paperwork. Sienna said you'd agreed to it but forgot. Derek helped her with the legal paperwork. I examined the signature more closely. It was a good forgery, but there were subtle differences in the letter formation that I could detect because I knew my own handwriting so well. Someone had practiced my signature extensively before creating this document. This is fraud, I said. I know. That's why I'm here. Nina explained how the scheme had worked. Sienna would schedule her fake business trips to coincide with my late work shifts, ensuring I wouldn't be home to notice her absence. Derek would handle the logistics, hotel reservations, conference materials, even fake receipts to support her expense reports. Meanwhile, they'd been systematically draining our joint accounts and building up a secret fund for their new life together. The forged HELOC was the final piece, designed to extract equity from our house without my knowledge. When were they planning to leave? I asked. Originally, Derek's job was supposed to start in January, but something's changed. Sienna seemed nervous last week, like they might need to accelerate their timeline. I thought about Derek's coffee shop performance, his carefully rehearsed concern about Sienna's affair with a mysterious stranger. He'd been testing me, trying to gauge how much I suspected and whether I was close to discovering the truth. What changed their timeline? I'm not sure, but Sienna's been asking a lot of questions about divorce procedures, asset division, that kind of thing, like she's preparing for something. Nina and I talked for another hour, with her filling in details about the elaborate deception that had been playing out behind my back. The scope of their betrayal was breathtaking. Not just the affair, but the systematic theft, the forged documents, the careful manipulation of everyone around them. What are you going to do? Nina asked as we prepared to part ways. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. But they're not getting away with this. Nina nodded. I know I don't have the right to ask this, but when you do whatever you're planning to do, please remember that I tried to make it right. Why should I trust you? You've been lying to me for 2 years. Because I'm giving you everything you need to destroy them both, she said simply. And because I'm hoping you're a better person than they are. I drove home with Nina's envelope on the passenger seat, my mind racing through possibilities. Sienna and Derek had played an elaborate game, but they'd made one critical mistake. They'd trusted the wrong person with their secrets. Now I had documentation of their affair, evidence of financial fraud, and a timeline of their deception. More importantly, I had an inside source who could provide real-time intelligence about their plans. The question was, What to do with all this information? I could take the evidence to the police and let the justice system handle the fraud charges. I could file for divorce and use the documentation to ensure a favorable settlement. I could confront Sienna directly and demand an explanation. Or I could do something else entirely. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Mr. Greaves working in his garden despite the drizzle. The old man waved and I waved back, wondering how much he'd observed over the past 2 years. Neighbors always knew more than they let on. Inside the house, I went straight to my basement workshop and spread Nina's evidence across my workbench. Bank statements, hotel receipts, text messages, and forged documents. A complete record of betrayal and theft. But as I studied the materials, I began to see something else. Patterns, vulnerabilities, opportunities. Sienna and Derek thought they were smart, but they'd left a trail that revealed not just what they'd done, but how they operated. Their methods, their resources, their weaknesses. If they wanted to play games, I was ready to change the rules. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. My old army buddy Jake worked in private security now, specializing in corporate investigations and asset recovery. He owed me a favor from our deployment days, and he had access to resources that weren't available to civilian IT analysts. "Jake," I said when he answered. "It's Elliot. I need a favor." "What kind of favor?" "The kind that requires discretion and creativity." Jake was quiet for a moment. "How much trouble are we talking about?" "The legal kind. My wife and her boyfriend have been stealing from me, and I want to return the favor." "Interesting. Tell me more." I spent 20 minutes outlining the situation, from Derek's coffee shop performance to Nina's revelations at Pike Place Market. Jake listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions about timelines and evidence. "So you want to hit them back?" he said when I finished. "I want to destroy them," I corrected. "Professionally, financially, socially. I want them to understand what it feels like to have your life systematically dismantled by someone you trusted. That's a tall order, and it's not without risks." "I'm aware of the risks. Are you interested?" Jake was quiet for a long moment. "When do we start?" Jake arrived at my house the next evening carrying a laptop bag and wearing the kind of nondescript clothing that made him blend into any crowd. He paused just long enough on the porch to listen, eyes flicking to the neighboring houses and the quiet street, before I let him in. The bag hung from his shoulder like an afterthought, but his grip on the strap was firm, habitual. He'd put on weight since our army days, but he still moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent years in hostile territory. "Nice place," he said, scanning our living room with professional interest. His gaze tracked exits, windows, the angles of furniture, lingering on the corners of the ceiling as if expecting something to blink back. "How much equity are we talking about?" "About 400,000, before they started draining the accounts." Jake whistled softly, low and controlled, more reflex than reaction. His mouth tightened as numbers clicked into place behind his eyes. "That's serious money. No wonder they went to all this trouble." We went down to my basement workshop where I'd set up a secure workspace away from any potential surveillance. The stairs creaked under our combined weight, and the air cooled noticeably as we descended, carrying the faint smells of oil, dust, and old wood. I'd stripped the room down to essentials: bare workbench, metal chair, a single lamp casting hard light and deeper shadows. Jake examined Nina's evidence with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent years analyzing intelligence reports, fingers steady as he flipped pages, eyes never stopping for long. "Your wife and her boyfriend are amateurs," he said after reviewing the bank statements. He tapped one page with a knuckle, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "They left a trail that a first-year forensic accountant could follow. The forged signature alone is enough for federal fraud charges." "I'm not interested in sending them to prison," I said. The words felt heavy but settled, something I'd already turned over too many times to doubt. "I want something more personal." "Revenge is a dangerous game, Elliot. It has a way of escalating beyond what you originally planned. His tone wasn't judgmental, just factual, the way you'd warn someone about unstable terrain. They've been playing me for 2 years. I think I'm entitled to a little escalation. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying me with the same intensity he'd once used to evaluate potential threats. His eyes narrowed slightly, not hostile, just focused, measuring what kind of man was sitting across from him now. What exactly do you have in mind? I outlined my preliminary plan: systematic exposure of their affair, public humiliation, financial retaliation, and professional destruction. I spoke evenly, as if reading off a checklist, careful to keep emotion out of it. Nothing illegal, but comprehensive enough to ensure they understood the consequences of their choices. That's ambitious, Jake said. He nodded once, slow. And it requires perfect timing. If they realize what's happening before you're ready, they could disappear with whatever money they've already stolen. Nina is keeping me informed about their plans. As far as I know, they're not planning to leave until January. Plans change, especially when people get nervous. He said it quietly, but the implication hung in the air. Jake opened his laptop and showed me some of the tools he'd brought. Software for monitoring communications, tracking financial transactions, and documenting digital evidence. The screen glow reflected in his eyes as windows and graphs slid into place. Most of it operated in legal gray areas, but nothing that would cross the line into criminal activity. Still, the precision of it all made my stomach tighten. The key is making them destroy themselves, he explained. We don't steal their money. We make sure everyone knows they stole yours. We don't ruin their careers. We give their employers reasons to question their judgment and integrity. How do we start? With Derek. He's the weak link. Successful guys like him usually have egos that exceed their intelligence. If we can make him panic, he'll probably make mistakes that expose the whole operation. Jake showed me Derek's social media profiles, professional associations, and public records. Photos of expensive meals, gym mirrors, corporate mixers scrolled past in quick succession. The man lived his life online, documenting his success and connections with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never experienced real consequences. He drives a Tesla, belongs to an exclusive gym, and eats at expensive restaurants, Jake observed. Everything about his lifestyle screams insecurity masked as confidence. Those are the easiest targets to manipulate. What do you suggest? We start with something small but personal, something that makes him question whether his secrets are as safe as he thinks. Jake pulled up Derek's Tesla app information. Apparently, the cars transmitted data that could be intercepted by someone with the right equipment. Maps, timestamps, charging logs appeared in neat rows. He parks in the same downtown garage every day, charges at the same station, follows predictable patterns. We could easily access his vehicle. What would we do to it? Nothing permanent, just something that sends a message. We spent the next hour planning what Jake called a soft approach, actions designed to create paranoia and uncertainty without crossing legal boundaries. The discussion was clinical, almost boring in its detail, but underneath it ran a current of intent that kept my pulse elevated. The goal was to make Derek feel like his perfect life was becoming unpredictable. The beauty of this approach, Jake explained, is that we're not actually threatening him. We're just making him aware that someone is paying attention. Guilty people tend to overreact to that kind of pressure. 2 days later, I called in sick again and met Jake at the downtown parking garage where Derek kept his Tesla. The morning was gray and damp, the kind of Seattle day that flattened sound and mood alike. The facility was typical of upscale Seattle commercial buildings, concrete and steel, with security cameras that were more for show than actual monitoring. "Third level northwest corner," Jake said, consulting his phone. He's been parking in the same general area for 6 months. We found Derek's black Tesla Model S exactly where Jake had predicted. The car was immaculate, detailed and polished like a showroom display. Even the tires looked like they'd been recently cleaned. It sat there quietly, confident in its own invulnerability. "This guy really loves his car," I observed, keeping my voice low, which makes it the perfect psychological target. Jake produced a small device that looked like a garage door opener. He worked quickly, movements economical, shielding his hands with his body as if anyone were watching. "This will temporarily disable his charging connection. Won't damage anything, but it'll prevent the car from charging overnight. He'll come back to a nearly empty battery." "That's it?" "For now. We want him confused, not suspicious." Jake attached the device to Derek's charging station, then we retreated to a coffee shop across the street where we could monitor the parking garage. The shop smelled of burnt espresso and sugar, and we took a table near the window, backs to the wall. At 6:30 p.m., Derek emerged from his office building and walked to the garage with the confident stride of someone whose day had gone exactly according to plan. 20 minutes later, he came back out, looking frustrated and checking his phone repeatedly. His shoulders were tense, his jaw working as he paced. He walked around the block twice, made several phone calls, and eventually called a rideshare service. "He's rattled," Jake observed, probably thinking it's a random malfunction but wondering why it happened today. "What's next?" "We wait a few days, then escalate slightly. The key is making him think these are coincidences until the pattern becomes too obvious to ignore." Over the following week, Jake orchestrated a series of minor but increasingly personal disruptions to Derek's routine. His gym membership card mysteriously stopped working. His usual lunch reservation was canceled due to a computer error. His expensive coffee order was consistently wrong at his regular shop. None of these incidents were serious enough to warrant investigation, but together they created a pattern of frustration and inconvenience that clearly affected Derek's mood and confidence. Nina provided regular updates on Derek's growing paranoia. He'd started asking questions about office security, wondering if someone might have access to his personal information. He'd even suggested to Sienna that they might need to be more careful about their communications. "He's exactly where we want him," Jake said during one of our evening planning sessions. "Nervous but not sure why, ready to make the kind of mistakes that will expose everything." "When do we move to the next phase?" "Soon, but first, we need to set up the final pieces." Jake showed me what he called the documentation phase of our plan. While we'd been psychologically pressuring Derek, he'd also been quietly gathering additional evidence of the affair and financial fraud. Bank records, communication logs, travel receipts. Everything needed to build an airtight case. "The goal isn't just to expose them," he explained. "It's to make sure that when we do expose them, the evidence is so overwhelming that they can't deny it or spin their way out of consequences." "What about Sienna?" "She's next, but we handle her differently." Jake had been studying my wife's patterns and vulnerabilities with the same methodical approach he'd used on Derek. Sienna was more careful than her boyfriend, but she had her own weaknesses. "She's built her entire identity around being smart and in control," he observed. "Women like that hate being outsmarted, especially by people they consider inferior. When she realizes how thoroughly we've documented her deception, it'll destroy her self-image as much as her reputation. How do we make sure she realizes it? We don't tell her, we show her, in front of people whose opinions matter to her." Jake outlined his plan for Sienna's exposure, a carefully orchestrated public revelation that would occur at her workplace, in front of colleagues and supervisors who knew her as a consummate professional. "The key is timing," he said. "We hit Derek first, make him panic, and do something stupid. Then, while he's scrambling to cover his tracks, we expose Sienna in a way that makes it impossible for either of them to recover. What if they run? Where are they going to go? We've documented everything. Nina's feeding us real-time intelligence. And after we're done with them, they won't have the resources to disappear." I thought about Sienna upstairs, probably texting with Derek while pretending to review work emails. For 2 years, she'd been living a double life, treating me like an obstacle to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. "When do we start the final phase?" I asked. Jake smiled, and for a moment I saw the same expression he'd worn during our deployment when a particularly challenging mission had finally come together. "Tomorrow," he said. "Time to see how smart they really are." The next morning, I watched Sienna leave for work with her usual efficiency and confidence. She kissed my cheek, reminded me about a dinner we had planned for the weekend, and drove away in her BMW like she had hundreds of times before. But this time would be different. This time, I knew exactly where she was going and what she was planning. And for the first time in 2 years, I was the one with secrets. I waited until her car disappeared around the corner, then called Jake. "It's time," I said. "Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back." I thought about the forged signature on the HELOC documents, the systematic theft from our joint accounts, the elaborate lies about business conferences. I thought about Derek's condescending performance at the coffee shop and Sienna's casual betrayal of our marriage vows. "I'm sure," I said. "Then let's give them something to really worry about." The first phase of our counterattack began at 10:30 a.m. when Derek arrived at his office to find a manila envelope on his desk containing photocopies of hotel receipts from his affair with Sienna. No note, no explanation, just evidence that someone knew about their secret relationship. Nina texted me an hour later. "Derek is freaking out. He's been on the phone with Sienna for 20 minutes whispering in the conference room." By lunchtime, Derek had called building security to ask about office access logs. He'd changed his computer password twice and started looking over his shoulder every time someone walked past his office. The psychological pressure was working exactly as Jake had predicted. "Phase 2 tonight," Jake told me. "Time to see how they handle real pressure." I spent the afternoon at work, maintaining my normal routine while my phone buzzed with updates from Nina. Derek and Sienna were clearly rattled, making hurried phone calls and sending encrypted messages through apps they thought were secure. But Jake had been monitoring their communications for days. We knew about their emergency meeting planned for that evening, their discussion of accelerating their departure timeline, and their growing paranoia about who might be watching them. They were right to be paranoid. As I drove home that evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: anticipation. For 2 years, I'd been reacting to Sienna's deceptions and manipulations. Tonight, I was finally taking control of the situation. My phone rang as I pulled into the driveway. Jake's name appeared on the screen. "They just left Derek's apartment together," he said, heading toward the waterfront, probably going somewhere they think is private to discuss their options. "Are you following them?" "From a distance. They're scared, Elliot. Really scared, and scared people make mistakes." I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the house I'd shared with Sienna for 4 years. Tomorrow, everything would be different. Our marriage, her career, Derek's reputation, all of it would be exposed and destroyed. But tonight, for just a few more hours, they still thought they were winning. "Let me know what they decide," I told Jake. "Will do." "And Elliot?" "Yeah. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." I walked into my house, made myself dinner, and went to bed early. Sienna came home around midnight, slipping into bed quietly and pretending to be asleep when I stirred. But I wasn't really sleeping. I was lying in the dark, listening to her breathing, and thinking about how different everything would be in 24 hours. The last night of our marriage, and she didn't even know it. I woke up at 6 a.m. to find Sienna already gone. Her side of the bed was cold, and there was no note explaining her early departure. Under normal circumstances, I might have been concerned. Today, I knew exactly where she was and why she'd left so early. Jake had texted me at 5:30. "Emergency meeting at Derek's office. They're planning to accelerate everything, moving to Phase 3. Phase 3 was what Jake called total exposure. the systematic revelation of everything we'd discovered, timed to cause maximum damage to both their personal and professional lives. I made coffee and went down to my basement workshop, where Jake had set up a command center complete with multiple monitors, communication equipment, and real-time feeds from various surveillance sources. He'd been there since 4 a.m., coordinating what he called the final act. "They're panicking," he said, without looking up from his screens. "Derek wants to leave Seattle immediately, but Sienna is trying to convince him to stick to their original timeline." "What's their argument?" "She thinks running now will look suspicious and draw attention they can't afford. He thinks staying is too risky now that someone knows about their relationship." Jake showed me transcripts of their morning conversation, captured through methods I didn't want to know too much about. The tone was tense, with both of them blaming the other for security lapses that had exposed their affair. "Who do you think is right?" I asked. "Neither. They're both thinking tactically instead of strategically. If they were smart, they'd come clean to their respective spouses and employers, take whatever consequences they faced, and try to rebuild. Instead, they're doubling down on deception, which makes them more vulnerable." "Exactly. And we're about to exploit every vulnerability they have." Jake outlined the day's schedule, a carefully orchestrated series of revelations designed to destroy their reputations, relationships, and financial security. The beauty of the plan was that most of the damage would be self-inflicted, caused by their own panicked reactions to information they couldn't control. First, we let their employers know about the affair and the potential conflicts of interest, Jake explained. He spoke calmly, as if outlining a routine procedure rather than the dismantling of two lives. His fingers drummed once on the table, then stilled. "Then we expose the financial fraud to the relevant authorities. Finally, we make sure everyone in their social and professional circles understands exactly what kind of people they really are." "How do we do all that without it being traced back to us?" "Anonymous tips, public records requests, and social media. By the time we're done, the story will be everywhere, but no one will know where it started." At 9 a.m., Jake sent carefully crafted emails to the HR departments at both Sienna's company and Derek's previous firm, detailing their affair and raising questions about potential conflicts of interest in various business deals. I watched the progress bars inch forward, each sent message feeling like a door closing somewhere I couldn't see. The emails included just enough specific information to be credible without revealing the source, phrased in the neutral language of concern rather than accusation. At 9:30, he filed a complaint with the State Bar Association regarding Derek's involvement in the forged HELOC documents, complete with handwriting analysis and banking records. He double-checked every attachment, every date and reference number, as though expecting someone to challenge him immediately. At 10 a.m., he submitted a tip to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division about systematic theft from joint bank accounts, including documentation of the fraudulent transactions. The room was quiet, except for the soft clicks of the keyboard and the hum of the computer fan, each sound unnaturally loud. "Now we wait," Jake said, "and watch them try to manage multiple crises simultaneously." Nina's updates came every 30 minutes, painting a picture of two people whose carefully constructed lives were collapsing in real time. Each vibration of my phone made my chest tighten before I even read the message. Derek had been called into an emergency meeting with his firm's senior partners. Sienna was fielding questions from HR about her relationship with external counsel. "They know something big is happening," Nina texted, "but they don't know how big yet." At lunchtime, Jake escalated to social media. Using anonymous accounts he'd created weeks earlier, he began posting carefully edited versions of the evidence we'd gathered. Hotel receipts cropped to show dates and locations, restaurant photos pulled from public feeds, even screenshots of text conversations with names partially obscured, all posted to local gossip forums and professional networking groups where Sienna and Derek's colleagues were likely to see them. "The key is making it look organic," Jake explained, like concerned citizens sharing information rather than a coordinated attack. By 2 p.m., the story had taken on a life of its own. Notifications multiplied faster than I could read them. People were sharing the posts, adding their own commentary, and speculating about additional details. Sienna's name was trending on local social media, and not in a good way. Seeing it there, detached from her face and voice, made it feel unreal, like watching someone else's disaster unfold. Derek just got suspended pending investigation, Nina reported. Sienna's been called into another meeting with legal. How are they handling it? Badly. Derek's threatening to sue everyone, and Sienna's trying to claim she's being targeted because she's a successful woman in tech. That's not going to work. No, it's not, especially when people see the bank records. Jake had saved the financial evidence for last, knowing it would be the most damaging. At 3 p.m., he released documentation showing the systematic theft from our joint accounts, the forged HELOC application, and the trail of money leading to accounts controlled by Derek and Sienna. The files spread quickly, copied and reposted, stripped of context and sympathy. This is where it gets serious, he told me. Financial fraud isn't just a civil matter, it's criminal. They're looking at potential federal charges now. My phone rang at 3:30. Sienna's name appeared on the screen and I answered on the second ring. My hand felt strangely steady. "Elliot," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. There was noise in the background, muffled voices, a door closing. "I need to talk to you. I'm at work. Can it wait until tonight?" "No, it can't wait. Someone is spreading lies about me online, and I think they might be targeting you too." "What kind of lies?" "Pictures, bank records, personal information. Someone's trying to destroy my reputation and I don't know why." Her breath hitched, and I imagined her pacing, phone clenched too tightly. I could hear the desperation in her voice, the fear of someone who was finally realizing how much trouble she was in. "That sounds serious," I said. "Have you called the police?" "The police can't help with this. Elliot, I need you to know that whatever you're seeing online, it's not what it looks like." "What does it look like?" Sienna was quiet for a long moment. The silence stretched, heavy and revealing. "Like I've been having an affair and stealing money from our accounts." "Have you?" Another pause, longer this time, filled with shallow breathing. "It's complicated. It seems pretty straightforward to me. Either you've been cheating and stealing or you haven't. I can explain everything if you'll just come home. Please, Elliot. I need you right now." I looked at Jake, who was monitoring the conversation and nodding encouragingly, his expression unreadable but firm. "I'll be home in an hour," I said. "Thank you. And Elliot, I love you. Whatever else you think, please remember that I love you." After hanging up, I sat in my basement workshop, staring at the screens full of evidence documenting 2 years of systematic betrayal. The room felt smaller than it had that morning, the air stale, the weight of what I'd set in motion pressing down on me. "She says she loves me," I told Jake. "I'm sure she does, in her own way. That doesn't change what she did. What happens when I get home? She'll try to control the narrative, minimize the affair, rationalize the theft, blame Derek for everything. She'll probably offer to go to counseling, promise to change, maybe even suggest that this crisis has made her realize how much she values your marriage. Will any of that be true? Some of it probably, but it doesn't matter. The damage is done. Her career is over, Derek's facing criminal charges, and their relationship is toxic now that they're both under pressure." Jake was right. Even if Sienna was genuinely remorseful, too much had happened for us to simply go back to the way things were. The trust was gone, the financial damage was extensive, and the public humiliation was just beginning. What do I say to her? Whatever feels right. But remember, she had 2 years to tell you the truth. She only wants to talk now because she got caught. I drove home through the familiar Seattle traffic, past the coffee shops and tech offices, where Sienna and Derek had conducted their affair. The city looked the same, but everything felt different now that I knew the truth. When I pulled into our driveway, I saw Sienna waiting at the front window. She came outside before I'd even turned off the engine, her face pale and her usually perfect appearance disheveled. "Thank you for coming home," she said as I got out of the car. "We need to talk," I replied. Inside, Sienna had prepared what looked like a presentation: printed copies of the social media posts, bank statements, and various documents spread across our dining room table. She'd been trying to make sense of the evidence, probably looking for ways to explain or minimize the damage. "Someone has been watching us," she began. "They know things that only a few people could know. Personal things, private conversations, financial information." "Who do you think it is?" "I don't know. Maybe someone from Derek's firm or a competitor trying to damage the company. But Elliot, I need you to understand, whatever you've seen, it's not the whole story." "Then tell me the whole story." Sienna took a deep breath, clearly having rehearsed this moment. "Derek and I have been having an affair. It started about 18 months ago, and I know how wrong it was. But the financial stuff, that's not what it looks like." "What is it then?" "Derek was helping me set up investment accounts, separate from our joint finances. I was trying to build up savings for us, for our future. The money was always meant to come back to our household." It was a clever explanation, partially true, but framed to minimize her culpability. She was admitting to the affair while denying the theft, hoping I'd be so focused on the emotional betrayal that I wouldn't examine the financial evidence too closely. "What about the forged signature on the HELOC?" Sienna's composure cracked slightly. "Derek said you'd agreed to it but forgot to sign. He was just trying to help expedite the process." "I never agreed to any HELOC." "Maybe there was a miscommunication." "There was no miscommunication, Sienna. You forged my signature to steal equity from our house." She stared at me for a long moment, probably realizing that her carefully prepared explanations weren't going to work. "How long have you known?" she asked quietly. "Long enough." "Are you going to leave me?" I looked around our living room, at the furniture we'd chosen together, the photos from our wedding and various vacations, the life we'd built over 4 years of marriage. None of it felt real anymore. "I don't know," I said honestly. "Right now, I'm trying to figure out who you really are." Sienna started crying then, not the manipulative tears of someone trying to avoid consequences, but the genuine grief of someone who'd finally realized what she'd lost. "I'm the same person I've always been," she said. "I just made some terrible mistakes." 18 months of systematic deception isn't a mistake. It's a choice you made every single day. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Derek just got arrested. Fraud charges. Thought you should know." I showed the message to Sienna, watching her face go pale as she read it. "He's been arrested," she whispered, "for forging my signature, stealing our money, and probably a dozen other things you haven't told me about yet. What's going to happen to me? I don't know. That depends on what the investigators find and whether you cooperate with them." Sienna looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before: complete vulnerability, stripped of all her usual confidence and control. "Can you forgive me?" she asked. I thought about the question for a long moment. Could I forgive her? Maybe, eventually. But forgiveness didn't mean we could rebuild our marriage. Too much damage had been done, too many lies had been told, too much trust had been broken. "I don't know," I said again. "But right now, forgiveness isn't the issue. Right now, you need to decide whether you're going to keep lying or start telling the truth." "What do you want to know?" "Everything." And for the next 3 hours, sitting at our dining room table surrounded by evidence of her betrayal, Sienna finally told me the truth about the last 2 years of our marriage. It was worse than I'd imagined, but somehow, finally knowing felt better than living with suspicions and lies. When she finished, I looked at my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. 3 days after Derek's arrest, Sienna moved out of our house and into a furnished apartment across town. She'd been placed on administrative leave pending her company's internal investigation, and her lawyer had advised her to minimize contact with anyone connected to the case, including me. Which was fine, because I had other things to focus on. Jake and I spent those 3 days documenting every aspect of the financial fraud, working with federal investigators who were building a case that extended far beyond my personal situation. It turned out that Derek had been running similar schemes with other clients, using his legal expertise to create sophisticated fraud operations that had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars. Your case was actually small compared to some of the others, Agent Martinez from the FBI's white-collar crime unit told me during one of our interviews. But it was the most thoroughly documented. Without your evidence, we might never have uncovered the broader pattern. What happens to Sienna? That depends on her level of cooperation and whether she was a willing participant or just a victim of Derek's manipulation. I thought about my wife's careful planning, her systematic lies, her forged signature on legal documents. Whatever else she wasn't a victim. She knew exactly what she was doing, I said. Agent Martinez nodded. We're getting that impression. On Thursday morning, I received a call from Nina asking if I wanted to meet for coffee. We'd been in regular contact since her initial revelation at Pike Place Market, but this felt different, more formal, like she had something specific to discuss. There's something else you need to know, she said when we met at a quiet cafe in Ballard. About the timeline of Sienna and Derek's relationship. What about it? It started before she married you. The words hit me like a physical blow. How long before? About 6 months. They met when Derek was doing legal work for her previous company. The affair was already established when she accepted the job at the fintech startup. Nina explained how Sienna had used Derek's connections to secure her current position, leveraging their relationship to advance her career while maintaining the facade of her marriage to me. She told Derek that marrying you was a practical decision, Nina continued. Financial security, social respectability, a stable foundation while she built her career. She never intended it to be permanent. So our entire marriage was a lie. I'm sorry, Elliot. I thought you deserved to know the truth. I sat in the coffee shop for a long time after Nina left, processing this final revelation. Our wedding, our honeymoon, our plans for the future, all of it had been performed by someone who was already committed to someone else. The betrayal was so complete, so fundamental, that I almost felt relieved. There was no ambiguity anymore, no question about whether our marriage could be salvaged. Sienna had never been my wife in any meaningful sense. She'd been an actress playing a role while living her real life elsewhere. That evening, I called my sister Fiona and told her everything: the affair, the theft, the arrest, and Nina's final revelation about the timeline. I'm coming over, she said immediately. You don't need to. Yes, I do. You shouldn't be alone right now. Fiona arrived an hour later carrying takeout from our favorite Thai restaurant and a bottle of whiskey that probably cost more than I made in a week. Emergency provisions, she explained. Food for sustenance, alcohol for processing. We sat in my living room, eating pad Thai and drinking expensive whiskey while I told her about the last few weeks. Fiona listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions but mostly just letting me talk. You know what the strangest part is? I said as we finished the bottle. I'm not even angry anymore. I should be furious, but mostly I just feel empty. That's probably shock, Fiona said. The anger will come later. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just relieved that it's over. What's next? Divorce proceedings start next week. The house will probably have to be sold to pay legal fees and restitution. I'll need to find a new place to live, rebuild my finances, figure out what my life looks like without her. That's a lot of work. Yeah, but it's honest work. For the first time in years, I know exactly where I stand. Fiona stayed the night, sleeping in the guest room and making breakfast the next morning like we were kids again, and she was taking care of her little brother after a nightmare. "You're going to be okay," she said as she prepared to leave for work. "Better than okay, actually. You're going to be free." After she left, I walked through the house one more time, looking at the remnants of my marriage. Photos on the mantel, furniture we'd chosen together, wedding gifts from friends and family who'd believed in our future. None of it felt like mine anymore. It all belonged to a different person, someone who'd been living a lie without knowing it. My phone rang as I was packing up the last of Sienna's belongings. Her name appeared on the screen, and I answered without enthusiasm. "Hi, Elliot. I was wondering if we could meet somewhere neutral to discuss the divorce settlement. I thought your lawyer advised you not to contact me directly." "He did, but I think we can handle this civilly without getting the attorneys involved in every conversation." There was something different about her voice, less desperate than during our last conversation, but also less confident. Like she'd accepted the reality of our situation, but was still trying to maintain some control over the outcome. "What did you want to discuss?" "Asset division, mostly, and I wanted to apologize again for everything that happened." "Apologies don't restore stolen money, Sienna." "I know, but I hope you understand that I never meant for things to go this far. You forged my signature and stole our life savings. How much further could it have gone?" She was quiet for a moment. "Will you meet with me? One last time, just to talk?" Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a hotel bar downtown where we were unlikely to run into anyone we knew. I arrived early and positioned myself at a corner table where I could see the entrance. Sienna walked in exactly on time, looking more fragile than I'd ever seen her. Her usual polished appearance was replaced by casual clothes and minimal makeup, as if she'd stopped trying to maintain her professional image. "Thank you for coming," she said, as she sat down across from me. "What did you want to talk about?" "Us, our marriage, whether there's any possibility of working through this." I stared at her, genuinely shocked. "You're not serious." "I know how it sounds, but Elliot, what Derek and I had wasn't real. It was exciting and dangerous, but it wasn't love. What you and I have is real. Had. What we had is over." "It doesn't have to be. People work through affairs all the time. With counseling and commitment, we could rebuild something stronger than what we had before." Sienna reached across the table and touched my hand. "I know I hurt you, and I know I broke your trust. But I also know that underneath all the anger and betrayal, you still love me." "Do I?" "Yes. I can see it in your eyes." I looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and tried to identify what I was feeling. There was sadness, certainly, disappointment, even a kind of nostalgic affection for the person I'd thought she was. But love? I wasn't sure I remembered what that felt like anymore. "Even if that were true," I said, "it wouldn't matter. You didn't just have an affair, Sienna. You built an entire alternate life based on lies and theft. Our whole marriage was a performance for your convenience." "That's not true. Nina told me about the timeline. You were already with Derek when you married me." Sienna's composure finally cracked completely. "Nina doesn't know what she's talking about. She knows that you used me for financial security while planning a future with someone else. She knows that you never intended our marriage to be permanent. People change, Elliot. Feelings evolve. What started as convenience became real." "When? When did it become real? During the 18 months you were systematically stealing from our joint accounts, or when you forged my signature to steal equity from our house?" Sienna started crying, but this time it felt manipulative rather than genuine. "I made mistakes, but that doesn't erase 4 years of marriage." "You're right. It doesn't erase them. It reveals them for what they really were." I stood up to leave, but Sienna grabbed my arm. "Please don't do this," she said. "Don't throw away everything we built together." "We didn't build anything together, Sienna. You built a lie, and I lived inside it without knowing it was fake. So that's it? You're just going to walk away?" "I'm going to walk away from a marriage that never existed. I'm going to rebuild my life based on truth instead of deception. And I'm going to try to become someone who's smart enough not to be fooled again." I left Sienna sitting alone at the table, crying into her wine glass. As I walked out of the hotel, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not for reconciliation, but for the possibility of a future that belonged entirely to me. 3 weeks later, I signed the divorce papers in my lawyer's office. Sienna had agreed to a settlement that gave me the house in exchange for not pursuing additional criminal charges related to the financial fraud. It wasn't perfect, but it was fair given the circumstances. Derek pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. Sienna received probation and community service in exchange for her cooperation with the ongoing investigation. I never saw either of them again. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Nina at a grocery store in Ballard. She was with a man I didn't recognize, looking happy and relaxed in a way I'd never seen during her friendship with Sienna. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Better," I said honestly. "Much better." "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." "What about you? Still working in HR?" "Actually, I left the company. Too many bad memories. I'm doing freelance consulting now, helping small businesses with their personnel policies." "That sounds perfect for you." Nina smiled. "It is." "And Elliot?" "I'm sorry about everything that happened. I should have told you the truth sooner." "You told me when it mattered. That's what counts." After she left, I finished my shopping and drove home to the house that was finally completely mine. I'd redecorated extensively, removing all traces of my marriage and creating spaces that reflected my actual preferences rather than compromises with someone else's vision. It was smaller than the life I'd planned with Sienna, but it was honest. And after years of living inside someone else's lie, honesty felt like luxury. That evening, I sat on my back porch with a beer, watching the sunset over the Seattle skyline. My phone buzzed with a text from Fiona. "Dinner Sunday? I'm making that pasta thing you like." I typed back, "Sounds perfect." For the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was and where I stood. I was Elliot Mercer, senior IT analyst, homeowner, brother, survivor of a marriage that had never really existed. And I was free. The rain started falling as I finished my beer, but instead of going inside, I stayed on the porch and let it wash over me. In the Pacific Northwest, rain wasn't something to hide from. It was just part of the landscape, part of the rhythm of life, like betrayal, like divorce, like the long process of rebuilding trust in your own judgment. I raised my empty bottle toward the gray sky and said quietly, "The last laugh's always the loudest. Hope you enjoy the silence, Sienna." Then I went inside, locked the door, and started planning the rest of my life.